NASCAR and the race teams are once again at a crossroads. Also, rumors suggest Matt DiBenedetto is linked to Kaulig, and we break down the ones to watch at this weekend's clash at the Coliseum. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to a packed episode of Out of the Groove. In just a few moments, I'll bring on a couple of NASCAR betting experts from wintherace.info to take a deep analytical dive into this Sunday's potentially damp clash at the LA Memorial Coliseum. But we've got some news stories and some rumors to break down beforehand. Let's begin with a massive breaking story from Sports Business Journal. I'll link the full article down in the description below, but according to Adam Stern, NASCAR's race teams have unanimously agreed to let their charter negotiation period with NASCAR expire. Now, this does not affect the actual charter agreement, which is still in place through the end of 2024, but it does once again show that both the race teams and NASCAR are not seeing eye to eye. The whole situation is muddy because these negotiations are taking place behind closed doors. Only a few details here and there are leaking out through the cracks. Sports Business Journal reports that the teams want two main things. They want the charter system to be made permanent, and they want a larger split of the media revenue. One big problem, though, NASCAR and the teams can't decide which math to use. According to SBJ, there are two different accounting methodologies being discussed. One suggests NASCAR is offering the teams a 42% split of the TV money, up from 35% currently, while another would have the teams receiving a 49% split, up from 39% currently. So two different, algorithms? Math hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. If you can't agree on the numbers, sounds like both sides are pretty far away. Sports Business Journal quotes one source that believes a potential agreement is likely still months away. This is a significant update, and I don't want to sound alarmist because even according to SBJ, most industry executives believe a deal will get done eventually. But I do want to make this clear. No deal by the end of 2024 equals doomsday. That is the doomsday scenario. Let's be clear, NASCAR needs the teams. They do. The teams, they are the performers, the drivers, they are the stars. That's who the fans largely resonate with. But at the same time, I don't want to get it confused. The teams do need NASCAR. NASCAR has been around for 75 plus years now. It's a huge, recognizable brand. They own an awful lot of the big tracks around the country. And shoot, look at the SRX shutting down earlier this month. It's hard to create your own racing series, even when you have a big star like Tony Stewart at the helm. Even when you have a TV deal with a major network, it's hard. So don't get it confused. Both sides do need each other. I haven't listened to the full episode yet, but Denny Hamlin, who is co-owner of 23XI Racing, one of the race teams, discussed these ongoing negotiations on his latest podcast episode.
I can't speak for the TNC. They're the ones who have been in the in-depth negotiations and sitting in rooms with NASCAR for hours on end, right? We tried to start these conversations 2 years ago, and it's been just delay, and then now here we are. We're at the end of the rope.
NASCAR needed to get the TV deal done first. The sports media landscape was competitive, uncertain. NASCAR needed to lock that down before they could ever sit down and have any detailed, in-depth discussion with the teams. Fortunately, NASCAR finally got that deal signed about 2 months ago, so hopefully this offseason they've made more progress with the race teams.
Do I believe we are closer to a deal now than 12 months ago? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, that is concerning because there should have been progress made over the past couple of months. It's still not clear what the sticking point is. We know that the teams want to make the charter system permanent, and we also know that NASCAR CEO Jim France in the past has been unwilling to even entertain such an idea. Maybe Jim France and NASCAR would soften their stance a bit if the teams were willing to make a couple of concessions. I think NASCAR wants to implement a spending cap, a budget, if you will. NASCAR doesn't want to give the teams all this extra money only for the teams to spend all that extra money and then complain again in 7 years that they don't get enough money. The teams have often said there's nothing left to cut. They seem opposed to any sort of spending cap. My guess is that's the sticking point. I'm sure it's way more complicated than I'm making it out to sound. Again, these negotiations are taking place behind closed doors. We just get snippets, a whiff of what's happening as it seeps through the cracks. But that's my theory, that's my guess. Denny Hamlin at least does sound fairly optimistic that a deal will eventually get done.
It usually always sorts itself out in the end, right? It has historically. So I would see no reason why it wouldn't now.
Hopefully that happens. I'm fairly confident that it will, but again, if for some reason both sides cannot reach an agreement by the end of 2024, doomsday. Anyway, let's move on. The rest of this show is hopefully a bit more positive. Jimmie Johnson's Daytona 500 ride will sport some familiar colors. Doesn't get much more iconic than Petty Blue. Jimmie Johnson paying homage to the Petty family's 75th year in NASCAR. Specifically, this scheme is designed to pay tribute to Richard Petty's 1964 Plymouth, the car he drove to win his first Daytona 500. I love the attention to detail. Jimmie written there just below the driver's side window, the 510 horsepower on the hood, got the Petty 75 sticker on there. The color is beautiful. This car is going to stand out. Simple, but very well executed. There have been a lot of paint scheme and sponsor reveals the past few days, but I figured this one was worth a mention. It jumped out. Jimmie Johnson, of course, will have to qualify or race his way into the Daytona 500. Right now, there are 41 drivers expected to contend for 40 spots. So the odds are in his favor as long as Jimmie can keep that beautiful Petty Blue scheme clean on Wednesday and Thursday, the week after next week. But speaking of odds, we'll bring in Ryan and Greg from Win the Race in just a few moments. But let's move on. One final news story, and it's not really a news story. It's more of a rumor. I don't really know how to classify this because I haven't heard the clip for myself, but I've seen people on X, Reddit, folks sent me these posts wanting me to react to the latest Matt DiBenedetto news. What am I getting at? Apparently, Chris Rice, team president, Kaulig Racing, was on SiriusXM NASCAR radio yesterday morning on The Morning Drive. Again, I've not heard the clip for myself, but according to this post on Reddit, he suggested that a well-known driver who's been very active on social media lately was close to signing a deal with the team and is still in discussion for potential future opportunities. A lot of fans in that Reddit thread, as well as on X in my DMs and mentions, believe Chris Rice was talking about Matt DiBenedetto. And honestly, they're probably right. I don't think it's hard to connect the dots. Matt DiBenedetto has been very open on social media in recent weeks.
We had a signed, pretty big sponsor deal, and they lied and didn't follow through on their end. So that's why we had to pull the plug.
I agree with most fans. I don't believe it's a coincidence that a few days after Matt DiBenedetto had a sponsor fall through, Josh Williams signs a part-time cup deal with Kaulig. Now you get these cryptic comments from Chris Rice. My guess is Matt DiBenedetto thought he had a big check, had a sponsor willing to pay, brought that to Kaulig. Kaulig, in no position to turn down sponsorship, said, hey, yeah, if that check clears, we'll put you in the seat for X number of races. Then the sponsor turned out to be shady, couldn't live up to their end of the bargain, and Kaulig said, hey, sorry, no pay, no ride. That's how it works. It's why, a few weeks back, I was very skeptical of Matt DiBenedetto potentially going to Kaulig when the rumors first began to surface. Because the one thing Kaulig Racing has made it clear they need most, Matt DiBenedetto doesn't have: sponsorship. Kaulig Racing dropped proven Cup Series winner AJ Allmendinger back down to the Xfinity Series because I guess the dollars and cents didn't add up. If Matt DiBenedetto can scrounge up enough funding, I'm sure there's a seat waiting for him at Kaulig, even if it's just for a couple of races. But Matt DiBenedetto isn't good enough. I think he's good. I don't think he's good enough to land a Cup Series seat without significant sponsor support. We've talked about this many times in the past. You can be uber talented, not much funding, Kyle Larson, for example, and get a great ride, or you can be the opposite. You can be, mildly talented but have a ton of funding behind you. Those are the ways you get rides. You can't be middle of the pack in talent and have very little funding. That's not a recipe for success. Good luck getting hired by a legit contender. It's tough. That's where Matt DiBenedetto is at. These latest rumors are very interesting. I hope he works something out with Kaulig, even if it's a couple races. I'd love to see DiBenedetto return to the Bristol night race this summer. A chance at redemption after how 2019 ended. I hope something works out for him. Those are just the latest rumors, discussion. Matt DiBenedetto still one of the most frequently discussed free agents this offseason. But now I want to talk about the clash at the Coliseum, specifically the odds. And I've invited a couple special guests on this week to help show me the odds. I am now joined by Ryan Stevens and Greg Mathern from Win the Race, here to talk a little sports betting ahead of a very unpredictable Clash at the Coliseum season opener. Gentlemen, I'll start with you on this one, Ryan. First off, it's good to see you early this morning. But secondly, who are some of the favorites you're looking at going into this race? Does this race favor more aggressive drivers who aren't afraid to, put the bumper to the back of somebody?
Yeah, I think so. That's what we've seen. There's a couple things. You have to unload fast. I think practice and the heat races have been very predictable. The fastest cars make their way up front one way or the other. If you look at some of the past races, we've only had two, but guys like, Bubba Wallace last year, extremely fast, gets moved out at the end. It happens every time. So you have to have that mix of unloading fast and just have an absolute rocket at a race like this. And then be willing to kind of get your nose in there and move someone out of the way.
Yeah, if I recall, Bubba Wallace moved his boss, Denny Hamlin, out of the lead or out of the front of the pack at one point. It's dog eat dog. Greg, do you have any drivers you're sort of keeping your eye on just as far as favorites are concerned?
When you look at the favorites, I think there's a lot of people out there who are kind of looking at some of those aggressive drivers, Kyle Busch being in particular. I know I've seen a lot of people, and so when you look at the drivers up towards the top, Kyle Busch comes to mind as somebody who has that aggressiveness, has always shown it at the short tracks in particular. And so I certainly understand why people are looking that direction at him.
Yeah, I'll ask you guys more about Kyle Busch and really all of Richard Childress Racing in a moment, but I actually want to start with RFK because they have missed the show the past 2 years. But I know how people, sports bettors, I understand how people think. They're looking for value. So RFK perhaps being a little, I don't know if I want to say undervalued, maybe they're being properly valued, but is there value there considering, I guess, the lack of success both Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher have had? What do you think, Greg?
I think there has been some value. I think some of that value has been betting down off across the board, but they've talked about it. And in fact, Ron, I'm going to kick to you because you had just seen something this morning that you shared with me that might give some significant hope to those prospects.
Yeah, I have Brad bet at 60-1, which is obviously no longer available. He's now 16-1 most places, but I guess that's another topic too, getting in on the books as early as possible to get that value. And I think we'll hit on that a little bit later. But you got to question motivation here, being an exhibition race. But one thing I did notice is Brad last year, he was one of only 6 drivers with an average true performance rank inside the top 10 on shorter, flatter tracks in 2023. And that included 3 of the 4 championship drivers. So he's in great company. I just think, if they show up and they care about this race and unload fast, obviously I think he could be a contender. And at 60-1 was just ridiculous. Even at 16-1, if he unloads and qualifies, runs one of the fastest practice times and is starting in the first couple rows, he'll probably be down to 8-1, 9-1, something like that. So even at 16, if you really feel good about it, I don't hate it. I know it's tough, with him not making the race the last couple of years, but there's a lot to point at from last year's data that could say they could show up fast here.
Absolutely. It'll be the debut of the new Ford Mustang Dark Horse as well. Hopefully those sharp angles may be tailored to short track racing. We'll have to wait and see on that. But for sure, typically you got to look at the lines as early as possible to potentially find the best value. I want to talk about a couple of drivers, though, that have found their way to the front of the field in the Clash each of the last 2 years, and that's the Richard Childress Racing drivers of Austin Dillon and Kyle Busch. I was shocked to look back this week and realize that Austin Dillon has back-to-back podium finishes at the Coliseum. Austin Dillon, really? What do you guys see there, Ryan? Do you see any, looking at the lines, at least as they stand now, do you think Austin Dillon, we already heard a little bit about Kyle Busch, but do you think Dillon is a legitimate underdog or undervalued pick?
It's what makes this week so hard. I mean, this track is different. I mentioned the shorter, flatter tracks, just talking about Brad, but this track is its own beast. There's no tire wear really at all. It's obviously half the length of the shortest track that there is that they race in the regular season. So it's a one-off, I think. Perhaps they have figured something out here because RCR, but the only team to finish top three here both times, like you said. And even when Tyler Reddick was with RCR 2 years ago, he had a top 5 true performance rank in the race that I ranked out, and he had 51 laps led in that race. So RCR has brought it with 3 different drivers every single time at this track. So maybe they've figured something out, and maybe it is just much different than the regular season, where on shorter, flatter tracks, they both had an average finish of 15.14 and 19.14. So they could not figure it out during the regular season. But maybe this track is different enough where they just know something no one else knows. They unload fast and they're contenders here. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's a great point about Tyler Reddick in 22. I forgot that he dominated the early stages of that race until something, I think, broke on the car. Greg, what do you feel about Austin Dillon? And are there any other notable sort of dark horse candidates that you see when looking at the odds?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you look at Austin Dillon, obviously, as we noted, he's podiumed both times. You look at 2022, he had 98% of his laps inside the top 10 here. Last year, he could have very well been the best car. Like if he had gotten out into the front, I don't know that anybody's going to catch him. Busch, talked about how great both of those cars were, and Busch had driven from the back of the field and was like, "Hey, look, my car was good. Austin's was better," right? So, they may have something here. I think, as Ryan noted, they kind of trended the wrong way on the short flat tracks during the regular season. So that does give me a little bit of pause. I'm not interested in Austin Dillon as an outright. He's only around 30-1 right now, and that just doesn't quite pique my interest on him at that price. That said, a couple of books have started pushing out their further down odds, and top 3 odds are out at a couple of books where he's sitting out at 9-1. I'm not going to bet that personally. It's just I don't see it as quite enough value. I'm really personally concerned about the end of the year. Particularly the closest thing that we have outside of this is Martinsville. And both of them were just very, very poor at Martinsville at the end of last year. So I'm not there. But I get, like, if somebody wants to kind of take a little sprinkle on him to finish top 3 at 9-1, I don't hate that, and I can understand the thought process behind it given how well they've been here. The other dark horse long shot is actually a little bit shorter than him, is Bubba Wallace. And we talked about him a minute ago. He had a great car last year. Toyota has actually shown up at this race both years, right? If we look at 2022, Kyle Busch had a great car in 2022 when he was still with Toyota. Prospell had a strong showing that year as well, finishing the top 10. Truex won last year. Reddick was 6th last year. Bubba led laps. Denny led laps.
Yeah.
So, Toyota has shown up here. And so we're getting Bubba right now at Bet365. You can get him at plus 750 for a top 3. And I've gone ahead and I've put half a unit on that one because I like that bet. I think if you look at some of the other books that have odds out, he's only around plus 600 for that same top 3. So that's 6-1. I'm not going to go there. 7.5 to 1's my floor on him. But I think if we look out at some of the other books that haven't released top 3 odds, you look at FanDuel, Fanatics, ESPN Bet, and DraftKings, they all have him at plus 2,500 for an outright. And if that translates down the same way that it did over at Bet365, we're probably going to see him around 7.5 to 1 at those books as well, and I like that bet.
Yeah, Bubba Wallace been fast for sure. Good to find some value there. And you hit on a lot right there, Greg, that I think is worth covering because, this is the first sort of NASCAR betting segment on Out of the Groove this year. So there might be a lot of folks watching where some of that goes right over their head. They don't understand or they haven't done this before. They don't know, the best ways to find value, how the lines, how the odds change throughout the week. I know this race in particular is kind of an outlier, and I'll start with you on this, Greg. Week to week, typically, how do you go about trying to find the best value picks? What do you look for? What sort of analytics are you studying?
Yeah, so I think the important thing to remember is that odds are going to move throughout the week, right? Odds are fluid. They're going to change, particularly as bets are made on them, right? The books are going to react. They're going to have to change some stuff for that. So I think when we look early in the week, we're looking for value bets, right? We're looking for bets that are probably typically more long shots. It's not to say that we won't find some value on favorites early in the week. There'll certainly be times where like the favorite is just priced wrong and you can still find value. But we're looking for odds that are going to move in a way that's going to give us value at the end of the week. So, Ryan Preece is a perfect example. When Caesar Sportsbook opened odds on Ryan Preece, he opened at plus 4,000, which translates to 40-1 odds, right? And that was just wrong. We just looked at it and we go, that's wrong. We look at Stewart Haas Racing having been fairly strong here both years. So 40-1 for that was just too long. And that's been bet down to around 20 to 18-1, depending on the book now. So I don't know that there's value down there, particularly because he's in a spot where he's got to drive himself into this race, right? He is not in a position where he has really any shot of getting that provincial 23rd spot on points, right? He's going to have to qualify. And I think Stewart Haas can, but that's something you got to factor in when you're making those bets. Some of the stats that I'm personally looking at, I'm looking at your average running position on similar tracks. I'm looking at the number of laps you had in the top 10 at similar tracks, and I'm looking at your just pure speed at similar tracks. So I think an important thing to know is finishing position is often not very indicative of future finishing position. Finishing position can end up being a little bit wonky, a little bit random at times. And so I'm far more concerned about how your average running position was, and what your speed when you were running was than I am necessarily about your finish. Because if you have a wreck, you can end up finishing 36, but you had the best car. So that's, that's where we're looking generally.
Yeah, and Greg mentioned it there. I'll kind of turn things over to you, Ryan. Win the Race has a ton of different resources, data, analytics available to its users. Can you tell us a little bit more about what sort of services Win the Race offers on a weekly basis?
So you touched on it there, like finishing position isn't always indicative of how someone performed. So I created a few years ago what I call true performance ranks. And it's my own, taking all of what we see as the most important data that spits out of a race and ranking it. So like a perfect example, if we're talking specifically about the Clash, Bubba Wallace last year finished 22nd. I have him as the second best true performer in that race, should everything have played out clean. And going back to Toyota, it was actually funny. Last year was Truex 1, Bubba 2, Hamlin 3. So Toyota did come correct here last year. We'll see. They've had some changes to their front too. We'll see how that makes the car react. But so true performance ranks are a big one. Kind of sets us apart. It's our own formula, and it's been very successful too. I mean, we've used it. We use it for our projections, and it tends to be very accurate. So there's that. We have a sim center, which is also great. Joe Schroeder has created this. It basically will give you what fair odds would be to bet on, X driver. So you can look at it. Well, it's different for a race like this, but say like once we get past Daytona and Atlanta, we get to Las Vegas. It's a little more predictable at tracks like that. So we'll do 10,000 plus simulations of the race, and it'll actually have, exact percentages of how often we think Brad Keselowski will finish top 10 in this race. And it compares it to the odds and tells you if we think it's fair or if you should pass on it. So just a nice tool. You can log in. It's right there ready for you. The whole point of the site that I wanted was it to just be very convenient. So even users can log in a half hour before a race on Sunday and create their DFS lineups or place a few bets or whatever.
Awesome stuff. Hey, you're speaking my language. I love data, analytics. It's easiest to operate when you have the numbers and especially that next level of numbers beyond just the basics like top fives and average finish. Those are the flashy stats everyone understands, but like you guys have said, they don't always tell the full story. Great stuff, Ryan and Greg. Really appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have to catch up many times throughout the season. Really appreciate you guys sharing some of your insight with us ahead of the Clash at the Coliseum.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a blast. Thanks.
A huge thank you again to Ryan and Greg for joining the show. If you're new to sports betting, NASCAR betting like I am, I encourage you to go check out Greg's article on wintherace.info. I put that link down in the description below. Always remember to bet responsibly, but that's a good crash course to help you kind of understand all the different nuances of the NASCAR betting sphere. I'm looking forward to having those guys and other experts on the show throughout the season, but thank you all so much for tuning in. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, it helps me out a ton. Subscribe if you're new to the show and you love all things NASCAR, you're in the right place. And as always, a huge thank you to my very generous Patreon supporters. Busy week, the off season is over. Next stop, the Clash at the LA Memorial Coliseum. Have a wonderful rest of your day, folks.